5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. In Mr. Bowman's testimony, he suggests that the political speech of unions is essentially equated to what he calls an offensive and radical left-wing political action. And we're used to hyperbole here, but this is certainly parroted by much of the talk we hear about what unions are doing in the political context today. And I think it stands behind a lot of the attacks we've seen on labor unions, this idea that labor unions are speaking in some radical way. And Mr. Kucinich did a little bit of this, but I do think it's important to, in some detailed way, go back over the record of the political action of labor. Now, I won't claim that labor has been responsible for every great social or workplace safety advancement in this nation, but they've been a pretty integral part. There was a time when there were little kids working in factories throughout this country. There was a time when the average adult was working 61 hours a week. And in large part because of union political action, we passed the Fair Labor Standards Act. There was a time in this country where workers were getting paid cents on the hour, weren't getting paid enough to put a roof over their head or food on the table. And in large part because of labor political action, we got the minimum wage. There was a time when if you got injured at work, you'd lose your job, and the only way that you could recover any damages or any lost wages was by suing your employer and racking up expensive legal fees. In part because of labor political action, we got workers' compensation law. And a lot of people say, well, that's all prior history. That's all about what happened 50 years ago, 75 years ago. Well, just about a decade ago, it wasn't foreign that if you had a newborn child or a sick relative and you had to take some time off work, you couldn't get your job back. And in large part because of labor political action, we got the Family and Medical Leave Act. You can disagree with all of those things. You can say that we shouldn't have a minimum wage, we shouldn't have the Family and Medical Leave Act, but I don't think that any of those acts are considered radical today. I don't think that much of what labor is advocating for is considered extreme today. And I guess it leads me to a few simple questions to the professor. We've heard a lot about the free rider phenomenon in the sense that if you're not paying dues in a right-to-work state, you still get the benefit of the contract that the labor union negotiated. And I think that's a real problem. But what we don't talk a lot about is the free rider syndrome, in which workers who aren't paying dues to a labor union also get the benefit of all of the social change, the very non-extreme advocacy that has led to these acts. And so, Professor, my question is this. Do non-paying dues members in this country get the protections afforded to them under the Fair Labor Standards Act?
Yes, they do.
Do non-dues paying members in this country get the protections afforded to them by a federal minimum wage?
Yes.
How about the workers' compensation law?
Yes.
And the Family and Medical Leave Act?
Yes.
Listen, we can disagree about the particular actions that labor unions engage in the political context. That's why we have the protections that allow individual workers to opt out. And I think folks on our side have done a pretty good job of explaining those protections. But the notion that there is some radical agenda that labor is perpetuating in the halls of Congress or in state legislatures, I don't think is backed up by the facts. And I think the idea that going back through the history of social change in this country, that we haven't been benefited, workers haven't been benefited, whether you are a dues-paying member of a union or not, by fair labor standards, minimum wage, workers' compensation, medical and family leave, and dozens of other pieces of legislation is a rewrite of what's actually been happening when labor unions come and advocate on behalf of their members in the United States Congress. With that, I yield back my time.